morning, and thank you, Mr. Chairman, for the opportunity to provide testimony on these education bills. My name is Alex Drower, and I'm a partner with the law firm of Hogan Lovells, U.S. LLP, where I've spent the last 15 years working on education policy and law matters for both K-12 public school and higher education clients, and where I head our firm's education industry sector group. I'm here with Shannon Hodge, who is an associate at the firm, also in our education practice, and a former public school counselor, and as the chairman said, currently a doctoral candidate at the Harvard University Graduate School of Education. Our education practice at our firm involves work with large urban school districts around the country on a wide range of legal and policy issues. As the chairman stated, we, along with our colleague Maurice Sneed, who is also a partner at Hogan Lovells and a former public school teacher, principal, and school administrator, and a faculty member, former faculty member at the Harvard School of Education, have worked with the committee to assist with the researching and drafting of these 7 education bills. This morning, Shannon and I will provide an overview of the 7 bills before you. For each of the bills, we'll discuss the issues it addresses, its major elements, and the reasons for it. Due to time constraints, we won't discuss every provision of every bill, but we are certainly happy to respond to questions at the conclusion of our presentation. 3 principles guided us in this process. First, we were very aware of the need for recommendations that fit the particular needs of the District of Columbia. We recognize the unique structures and imperatives for public education in the district, and we came to this task without preconception and without pre-identified solutions. Rather, we did our best to look at the concerns that have been raised by parents, teachers, principals, school officials, and key stakeholders, and to identify the best legislative solutions to address those concerns. To do this, we engaged in a searching process whereby we canvassed best practices from school systems and states around the country and conducted a close review of the scholarly research. As a second principle, we took into account the role of the D.C. Council as a legislative body. This meant that we were mindful that we were drafting legislation, and we took pains that our recommendations were appropriate for that context. For some issues, that meant looking at models from state legislatures. The guide star was always to help the D.C. Council create an environment where students, schools, and school leaders can thrive. Third principle is that this process is a collaborative one that continues to evolve through discussions with key stakeholders. This hearing and those that follow are integral to the current and future work of the Council in public education, and we sincerely thank you, Mr. Chairman, and the committee for the opportunity to be involved. We will now discuss each of the bills in turn. We'll begin with the Fair Student Funding and School-Based Budgeting Act. A key goal of this act is to target additional school-level funding to address the needs of students from low-income families, enable school principals to boost graduation rates, and support career and technical education programs. The recommendation that supports these goals is to modify the existing uniform per-student funding formula to increase the funds available to local education agencies in each of those 3 areas that I've just mentioned. As the committee is aware, the District of Columbia currently uses a weighted student formula to determine how LAs, local education agencies, receive local funds. The Lateran Council first established a foundation level, which represents the cost of providing public education services to a student. Next, weights are applied to that foundation level based on grade level and school type. Finally, supplements are added to the weighted foundation level for students identified as entitled to and receiving special education, English as a second language, or bilingual education services, and for students enrolled in summer school who do not meet literacy standards, and finally for students enrolled in extended school year programs. This bill would leave those current rates in place and would add 3 new funding rates to the formula. It is important to note that the bill does not dictate the numerical values of these rates. Rather, it acknowledges these as areas of importance for the city and modifies the funding formula that already exists in order to incorporate them. Let me go through the three weights, the three new weights. The first new weight is for low-income students. Most states within the United States acknowledge that it costs more to educate students from low-income families, and they do this by targeting additional funds to school districts, specifically for low-income students. However, the district's weighted student formula does not directly provide additional funds for low-income students at this time. The proposed legislation brings the district into line with most other states by adding a supplement for students eligible for free or reduced-priced meals. This is similar to the approach in many other cities, such as Boston, Houston, New York, San Francisco, which all target local funds to low-income students through their funding formulas. Second, the bill includes a weight for students attending high schools with graduation rates under 75%. This 75% figure was selected for a reason. It approximates and is in fact somewhat lower than the national four-year graduation rate, which was about 78% for the class of 2010, based on data from the National Center for Education Statistics. The district's graduation rate was 59.9%. As shown in the chart on the screen, no state's graduation rate was lower. I would like to address a question that we actually received, which was whether this weight would encourage principals to try to keep students from graduating so as to suppress the graduation rate. An underlying assumption of this legislation is that if there is a principal in the district who would engage in that kind of gamesmanship at the expense of students, that person should not be a principal in the District of Columbia. But in any event, this bill would not reward that type of activity because it requires each school principal to explain to the chancellor's satisfaction how the additional funds received through this weight are being targeted to address dropout prevention. And, as we will discuss, the chancellor will hold school principals accountable for student outcomes. Additionally, graduation rates are one of the few metrics that must be included in the proposed statewide accountability plan that we'll discuss in a moment. And that creates another check on any attempt a principal could make to manipulate graduation rates to receive additional funding. Finally, the bill includes a budget stabilization provision that would prevent a school from losing more than 5% of its budget from the previous year, which in this case would provide something of a soft landing to a school once it crosses the 75% target. The third new weight introduced in the bill is a funding weight for career and technical education programs known as CTE. CTE programs enable students to gain experience in key economic sectors while in high school, preparing them for careers in fields such as biotechnology, communications, construction, engineering, hospitality, medical sciences, and transportation. CTE programs are a productive training ground, both for students who wish to pursue post-secondary education and for those who wish to enter the workforce immediately after graduating from high school. School districts such as Boston, Houston, and New York City include allocations in their funding formulas for CTE programs. Adding a CTE weight not only creates funds to help local education agencies establish these critical programs, but it also signals to the broader community that CTE programs are a citywide priority.
The next issue the legislation addresses is that principals in DCPS want greater flexibility to manage their budgets to address areas of concern. Although the school system as a whole receives funds based on the weighted student formula, DCPS allocates funds to individual schools using a completely different model, one that designates much of a school's funding to specific categories regardless of need. While individual schools may be able to negotiate with the central office to receive more flexibility, that flexibility and budget autonomy is not consistent across the district. To address this concern, the bill would move the school district to a school-based budgeting system where DCPS will allocate 80% of the funds that it receives from the city directly to schools, based on the same funding formula that applies to the district as a whole. School principals will then have more control over their budgets. The move to school-based budgeting would put the district into line with cities such as Baltimore, Cincinnati, Denver, Houston, New York, Oakland, and San Francisco, which have all adopted this budgeting model. Leaders in districts that have moved to school-based budgeting have reported increased student achievement and improved school outcomes. The research findings and experience of other cities show that to attract the best school leaders and to achieve desired improvements and student outcomes, principals need to have the flexibility and autonomy to manage their own budgets. The recommended move to school-based budgeting is not intended to eliminate the central office or give principals unbridled discretion. Rather, the chancellor will be responsible for holding principals accountable for student performance. The chancellor will also set the minimum standards for school budgets, will provide professional development for principals to assist them with budgeting, and will have to approve principals' budgets before providing schools with funds. In addition, DCPS will continue to fund specific district-level expenses, such as transportation, food services and staff, and technology services and staff. In addition, should principals decide they would rather purchase some services or supplies in bulk from or through the central office, nothing in this bill will prevent them from doing so. The next two key provisions of this bill address budget stabilization and a transportation subsidy. Linking school budgets to the funding formula is likely to create year-to-year fluctuations in funding based on changes in enrollment. In recognition of this issue, the proposed legislation includes a budget stabilization provision that would prevent an individual DCPS school from losing more than 5% of its budget from the previous year unless there is a substantial instructional or programmatic change. For example, if the school stops offering an entire grade level. The final element of this bill that we wish to highlight is the creation of a full public transportation subsidy for public high school students eligible for free or reduced price meals. This is designed to address the fact that the cost of transportation has a negative effect on attendance rates in the district. The primary goal of the Individual School Accountability Act of 2013 is to acknowledge that the federal school accountability system has not been sufficient to trigger much-needed school improvement in DCPS schools. As Councilmember Catania has suggested, if DCPS continues to improve at the current average growth rate, it will not reach its goal of 75% proficiency for 30 years. We have recommended a system that holds schools accountable for student outcomes and requires interventions when schools fail to meet expectations, but ultimately leaves the education decisions in the hands of the education professionals. This bill would require OSSE to adopt a district-wide accountability policy. It is true that the district operates under an Elementary and Secondary Education Act waiver that requires the state superintendent to establish annual measurable goals and requires interventions for schools that fail to meet them. But that system, in one form or another, has been in place for over a decade, and many feel that the district cannot afford to wait 3 more decades to reach its goals. Furthermore, the ESEA is 6 years overdue for reauthorization. Regardless of what happens at the federal level, the District of Columbia needs to have a plan to hold schools accountable for student performance. Most states have existing legislation establishing school accountability frameworks. This bill would bring the district into line with what the majority of states have determined is the best way to hold schools accountable. The proposed district-wide accountability plan is carefully designed to be fully consistent with the ESEA flexibility waiver. First, each of the measures identified in the bill as factors in the performance framework, that is academic achievement and growth, attendance rates, and graduation rates, are already included by OSSE in its ESEA measure. Second, under the ESEA waiver, schools that fail to meet the same target for 2 consecutive years will be required to implement certain interventions. Under the accountability plan recommended in the legislation, the same is true. The chancellor would be required to develop a turnaround plan with community input for underperforming schools. Turnaround plans could include such interventions as expanding or replacing curricula, reallocating school funds, providing additional funds to schools, extending the school day or school year, adding pre-kindergarten, requiring administrators or teachers to reapply for their positions, and increasing opportunities for teacher planning and collaboration. With turnaround plans, this bill incorporates one of the most prevalent and well-received school-level interventions. But the bill goes even further to grant the chancellor the ability to turn underperforming schools into innovation schools. which would have greater flexibility from municipal regulations and collective bargaining agreements. Several states, including Colorado, Connecticut, Massachusetts, Ohio, and Washington, have legislation creating innovation schools. Schools that underperform under this bill will face additional consequences. If a school under a turnaround plan fails to meet its goals for 3 consecutive years, the chancellor must convert the school to an innovation school, replace the administrators and staff, contract with an independent organization to operate the school, or close the school. These options mirror those available in many states. If an innovation school fails to meet its goals after 5 years, the chancellor must either revoke the school's status as an innovation school or close the school. For both innovation schools and schools operating under turnaround plans, the chancellor is the final decision maker.
The accountability bill also recognizes that charter schools must be held accountable for student performance as well. And it requires charter authorizers to adopt performance frameworks or use the one OSSI develops for DCPS. A recent study on charter schools identified the district as one of 7 states where charter school performance outpaced traditional public school performance in both reading and mathematics. The report suggested a part of the charter sector's success in the district was a strong school accountability system that allowed authorizers to close underperforming schools. According to the report, and I'm quoting, "The license to close bad schools is the insurance policy the sector possesses." This bill includes several modifications to make it easier for charter authorizers to address underperformance by closing schools. First, charter authorizers can revoke charters for schools that fail to meet minimum performance levels. The current charter legislation and law only allows an authorizer to revoke a school's charter if the school violates the law, fails to meet the goals and academic achievement expectations set forth in the charter, or for fiscal mismanagement. Thus, under the current system, persistent failure on the performance framework does not lead to closure. Rather, it prompts a review of the charter. This bill gives greater weight to the authorizer's performance framework by allowing it to be a basis for revocation. In addition, the bill permits authorizers to close individual campuses of public charter schools. The district presently is unlike most states in that it does not have a statewide assessment mandated by statute. The Focused Student Achievement Act of 2013 rectifies this omission by requiring students to be assessed from pre-kindergarten through high school. For students in pre-K through 2nd grade, local education agencies would be charged with developing and administering developmentally appropriate assessments to monitor progress, diagnose difficulties, and inform instruction and remediation needs. OSSI would be charged with selecting and adopting district-wide assessments in English language arts and mathematics for students in 3rd grade through 8th grade and in high school. OSSI may require that a portion of the student's final course grade be based on an end-of-course assessment, that is, an assessment tied to a particular course a student is taking, if OSSI chooses to adopt such an assessment. It is important to note that this proposed legislation would not require OSSI or a local education agency to abandon any assessments currently being administered to students in 3rd grade through high school. Nor would it interfere with the PARC, or Partnership for Assessment of Readiness for College and Careers, the PARC system that the district has agreed to adopt. Rather, the legislation simply requires the district to have an assessment system. The bill also includes a measure permitting OSSI to establish policies to ensure that assessment of student learning does not compromise actual student learning. Specifically, it authorizes OSSI to adopt regulations to place limits on the amount of instructional time spent on administering or preparing students for standardized assessments, just as the state of North Carolina has done.
Another issue addressed in this bill is that the current DCPS promotion policy is not consistent across grade levels. The bill addresses this issue by placing the decision to retain students in pre-kindergarten through 8th grade in the hands of principals. Students in 3rd through 8th grades must pass a majority of their classes to be promoted to the next grade. And in recognition of the importance of 3rd grade as a gateway, students must pass both mathematics and English language arts for promotion to the 4th grade. But more important than allowing principals to retain students, the proposed legislation requires schools to intervene to assist students before they fail. Schools must identify students at risk of retention and provide an individualized intervention plan in January. And 60 days before the end of the school year, schools must provide written notice to parents to let them know that their children are at risk of being retained. In addition, students identified for retention must attend summer school, but they may avoid retention by successfully completing summer school. Research and opinions on social promotion and retention are mixed, in part because models vary greatly. But the focus should not be on the debate between promotion and retention, but on identifying students who are struggling and provided them the needed supports. Research shows that retained students can achieve academic gains beyond those attained by their socially promoted peers because of early identification and intervention, summer school, and an additional year of instruction. The aim of this legislation is not to retain students for the sake of claiming an end to social promotion. Instead, the goal is to require schools to identify students at risk of being held back, to intervene before the retention decision is made, and to continue to support students who have been retained.
We now turn to the Unified Public Education Lottery Act. Currently, families looking to exercise choice in the public school system are confronted with multiple lottery systems, numerous applications to complete, and a variety of different deadlines. Schools may release lottery results at different times and require families to respond by different deadlines. And parents may accept a seat for the same student at more than one school. This system artificially restricts seats that would be available to other students, and it means that school staffing, programming, and budgeting decisions are often based on unreliable enrollment projections. Under this bill, OSSI would establish a unified lottery for public schools with a common application and deadline. OSSI would also collect information on educational programming to assist parents and students with school selection. Having a single lottery system with a common application will allow parents to apply to several schools by filling out only one application. This model of using a common lottery system for both traditional public schools and charter schools has been tested with positive results in other school districts. Simply put, a unified lottery will make the choice process simpler and fairer for both families and schools.
Turning now to the Comprehensive Planning and Utilization of School Facilities Act. The current system of building utilization leaves many public schools vacant while public charter schools scramble for space. This problem is a national one, and according to one set of researchers, the district has one of the best set of laws to address this issue. However, those same researchers note that the laws here are often ignored. The recommended bill has three parts. First, it requires the chancellor to submit an annual educational facilities plan to establish the school district's facilities needs. The chancellor may request that vacant properties be set aside for swing space, for future classroom instruction, or for future administrative space. The Department of General Services would be responsible for evaluating these requests. Next, the department would designate as surplus any vacant property and any property that has been significantly underutilized for 2 consecutive years, unless the department has approved the chancellor's request to designate the property as intended for DCPS use. These surplus properties would then be made available for sale or lease, with the right of first offer going to public charter schools and other educational or youth services organizations for 2 years. The final key element of this bill is the introduction of a show cause hearing. If the chancellor or the department fails to comply with this act, a charter school may request that the public charter school board intervene by filing a petition for an order to show cause in the Superior Court. Through this show cause hearing, the Superior Court would require the chancellor or department to show good cause why the court should not require a surplus school building to be sold or leased. The show cause requirement included in the facilities bill provides an opportunity for the public to hold the chancellor and the department accountable for complying with this act.
The goals of the Parent and Student Empowerment Act of 2013, as its name suggests, are to support and empower parents and students as they navigate the district's public education system. The bill does this in 2 ways. First, it clarifies the role of the existing Office of the Ombudsman for Public Education, and second, it creates a new office whose sole purpose is to support parents and students. The 2007 education reforms created the Office of the Ombudsman for Public Education to serve as a resource for the public. But that office has been unfunded and non-existent for several years. As the public education system has become more complicated, students and parents continue to search for a resource to help them answer questions and resolve complaints that involve public schools. This bill clarifies that the role of the Office of the Ombudsman for Public Education is to track concerns and questions related to public education in the district, to identify patterns of issues across school systems, and to address issues and concerns that may otherwise become formal complaints. The bill also clarifies the Ombudsman's role in offering complaint resolution services for public school students. The Ombudsman will resolve complaints, refer complaints to other agencies or departments, provide an opportunity for the parties to meet, or conduct mediation proceedings. This model of the Office of the Ombudsman is nothing novel. It has been tried and tested elsewhere, such as notably in the state of Washington.
Even with an active ombudsman, some issues require assistance or advice that a neutral entity like an ombudsman is not equipped to provide. In such instances, parents and students need an informed resource to advocate for their interest. Currently, such a resource does not exist on a systemic, statewide level, leaving parents to navigate the complex maze of public education in the district by themselves. This bill creates an Office of the Student Advocate within the State Board of Education to provide outreach to students and parents in the district. Among other things, the office will assist parents with a number of items, including facilitating the enrollment process, helping students and parents understand the educational options available to them, and advocating for students in mediation proceedings before the Ombudsman. The student advocate will also have the ability to recommend policy changes and strategies to improve the delivery of public education services. The student advocate would also operate public education resource centers throughout the district. These centers are based on a model in Boston, where family resource centers in several zones throughout the city serve a crucial role for parents and students navigating the public education system. The district's resource centers will provide a visible presence for the student advocate. Staff, which may include parent volunteers, will advise students, parents, and guardians on the school choice process and provide information on application, enrollment, assignment, and education programs. Staff will also connect parents and students to programs and resources for English language learners and students with disabilities. These centers will further their student advocates' goals to inform parents and students about public school choice and to provide greater assistance to help families secure a quality public education.
The final bill is the Public Education Governance Improvement Act of 2013. After 6 years living under the Public Education Reform Amendment Act of 2007, this bill acknowledges that some modifications are necessary to respond to lessons learned. One lesson is that the move toward mayoral control did not eliminate the important need for oversight of the public school system. Currently, the mayor appoints both the DCPS chancellor and the state superintendent, who is responsible for regulating and overseeing certain aspects of DCPS. As such, the mayor appoints both the officer responsible for operating the school system and the officer responsible for holding that system accountable for student performance. This structural arrangement, by its nature, wholly independent of any particular people involved, may provide a state superintendent with less than full leeway to exercise his or her oversight role, which, depending on the circumstances, might well involve being critical of the chancellor, and thereby, at least indirectly, the mayor. This bill addresses this structural tension by specifying that the state superintendent and members of the public charter school board can only be removed from their positions for cause related to their character, efficiency, or performance of their duties. The bill also requires state board approval to remove the state superintendent from his or her position and aligns the state superintendent's term with that of the mayor. Another set of modifications in this bill relates to the State Board of Education. One concern is that under current law, the State Board is limited in its ability to make policy recommendations. Essentially, it can only offer a recommendation when asked to do so by the state superintendent. So even though the public elects the State Board to provide input on public education, board members can only provide that input when and if the state superintendent affirmatively asks the board to review or consider an item. This bill affords the State Board the ability to initiate policy recommendations for review and approval. In addition, the State Board will produce an annual review of OSSE and the state superintendent's performance in improving educational outcomes. The bill also requires the State Board and the Public Charter School Board to submit a joint annual report on the state of primary and secondary public education in the district. This report will address academic achievement from the prior school year, including a review of student achievement and school performance, the challenges facing pre-kindergarten through 12th grade education in the district, and both boards' initiatives and goals for future growth and achievement. A final yet quite important element of this bill is that it allows OSSI to waive education regulations upon request from a local education agency. The current educational environment requires flexibility and creativity in schools, but school leaders may be hampered by municipal regulations that are either outdated, ineffective, or both. If a local education agency can show that waiving an education regulation will improve student achievement, OSSI would have the authority to grant that waiver. This provision acknowledges that schools often need flexibility to improve student outcomes, and that where existing policies hinder those efforts, a mechanism should exist to waive the regulations. To conclude, Mr. Chairman, the goal of the waiver provision that I just mentioned, and indeed the goal of all 7 of the bills we have described this morning, is to continue to build a framework for a successful public education system. Although each of the bills is presented separately, the 7 work together as a complementary set of proposals that are designed to respond to areas of identified need, and often critical need. As we have tried to suggest this morning, all of the proposals were constructed with one overriding goal, which we know is shared by every member of the Council, to create the conditions in which schools and education leaders in the district can help students to succeed. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for allowing us to discuss these bills, and we would be happy to answer questions.